The state of Florida has rejected a proposed advanced placement course focused on African American studies because it included study of topics like the movement for Black lives, Black feminism, and reparations, according to a list of concerns Governor Ron DeSantis' office gave CNN. The document with concerns also questions the inclusion of certain Black authors whose writings mention critical race theory and Black communism.
The White House has slammed DeSantis' decision. Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said, quote, "It is incomprehensible. Let's be clear, they didn't block AP European history. They didn't block our art history. They didn't block our music history. When you think about the study of Black Americans, that is what he wants to block." The AP African American studies courses were first piloted this fall in 60 schools across the country. Senior Lecturer of African American Studies at the University of Maryland, Jason Nichols, joins us now to weigh in. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You wrote a great piece for us at Newsweek about this. Lay out your argument about, where you're taking issue with Governor DeSantis on this issue.
Well, the thing about African American studies is a lot of people get it mixed up. They think that African American studies is simply Black history. Now, Black history is incredibly important and it's an integral part of African American studies, but we have to understand that it's much more expansive than just Black history. Now, one of the things that we do know and that we think is going to happen is that Governor DeSantis has a way that he wants Black history to be taught. And we've seen this throughout history as a means of steering the next generation and the way they think. And that's problematic for many reasons. Number one, it takes away critical thinking, which is one of the things that African American studies aims for. It's not a field that teaches people what to think or how to think. It's something that presents different concepts, different ideas, allows for people to formulate their own way of thinking. And that's really important for the development of young people, for them to be able to see different concepts, different theories, different ideas, and it helps for them to develop their critical thinking skills. And when you rob them of that and just steer them in one direction and only want certain types of history taught or one perspective taught, it can be really problematic. And that's my problem with what Governor DeSantis is doing.
So let me play devil's advocate to that a little bit, with the caveat that I really don't like the look of the state government telling schools they can't teach some curriculum or whatever. You know, I would generally leave it to the schools. If one school wants to teach this, one school wants to teach that, you can pick which school is best for you. That would be my preferred kind of way of going about this. But I guess I would say, and I know a lot of the objection to this curriculum in particular stems from what's being taught. I think the DeSantis administration and other conservatives feel like it's very left, even very socialist or communist. But African American contributions are covered in existing, any decent American history course talks about African-American inventors and poets and artists, and then movements that involved a lot of important and influential Black Americans, like the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil War is a very rigorously covered topic in all American history classes, again, unless they're totally incompetent. So I guess part of the argument is that this is just part of Black Americans' contributions can't be separated from American history, so why have a separate course about it?
So again, it's more than history, but one of the things that I would say is you said decent courses, and I think that's the key there. You don't always get that. What you oftentimes get is the month of February, where they talk about Dr. King, and they oftentimes put him in the wrong context, as his daughter would say. So I don't think that you're necessarily getting what you would get in an African American studies course, and you get more depth the way you get in the European history and culture courses, the way that you could take in Florida, or the way you get in the Spanish history and culture courses that you would take in Florida. So basically, African American history and culture is something that is being studied or should be studied on the same level because, as you said, African Americans have made great contributions. They've also suffered a lot of things that need to be discussed if we want to move forward. One of the things that I think we all know is that, if you don't learn about history, you're deemed to repeat it. But again, this is more than just history. Some of the concepts are difficult concepts. Institutional racism, white supremacy, these are difficult concepts to discuss. But in order to develop critical thinking, I've had students who are incredibly conservative who have enjoyed the courses and learned a lot, and they're no less conservative. They just have a different view or broader context for their beliefs. And I think that is important for young people to have.
I mean, I agree in part and disagree in part because I don't think it's a direct comparison to say, because this is African American history. It is not like if this was an African history class, then it would be a history of the continent of Africa. That would be like having the European history class or whatever civilization history class. We're talking about a subgroup of the American experience, but there isn't I don't think there's an Italian American history class or an Irish American history class, nor do those ethnicities have their own kind of month-long place in the curriculum. And I'm not saying they should, but their impact on the American experience, the migrant experience, how they formed those cities in New York, Boston, et cetera, is talked about within the context of American history. There are chapters and sections on it. African American history has a place in that, has a very large, very, very large place. Don't get me wrong. But I guess that would be my. I don't think it's the same as like a European history class or a Spanish history class. Those are civil. If they were vetoing an African history class, then I would say, yeah, that's pretty just flat out objectionable. But I don't think it's the same thing as that. And it sounds like you agree that it's not the same thing as that, because you're saying you're not just talking about the history of these people, but there's a lens of analysis, a sociological, cultural analysis. And honestly, I think that's what the DeSantis administration is probably objecting to, because that has a history of being very left-coded, like extremely left.
So I think that it is true that is what they object to. Because, again, the way that history has been taught, the way I learned it in school, first of all, when we talk about this, we have to remember the context of Florida, where in my piece I mentioned the fact that Florida still has 3 Confederate holidays that it observes. It has 75 Confederate monuments. So you're getting a certain slant already. And we know that Confederate monuments come from a miseducation campaign by the United Daughters of the Confederacy. It was meant in order to make young people, and they had their own purposes to make young people see the Civil War as a noble, endeavor by the South. And what basically happened was you had generations and generations of people. This only stopped around 1978, Lost Cause history. And it was a way of trying to minimize dissent and protest from the status quo, and to venerate things that should be seen as shameful in our history. I think what DeSantis is doing is trying to minimize dissent and trying to keep people from thinking critically, and for them to think Black history, okay, we got Frederick Douglass, cool. We got, slavery ended. We're actually going to throw Abraham Lincoln in and make him the hero of the end of slavery. And then we're going to talk about Dr. King and take him largely out of context. And people will really only remember 2 quotes, I have a dream, and something about content of character, and not about his democratic socialism and many of his radical beliefs. So I think what African American studies does is recognize the importance of African Americans. We know in British North America, 1619 is a really important date. It was before the Mayflower. You had the White Lion that came to Virginia, in 1619, before 1620, which is when the Mayflower landed. It's an integral part of American identity, and it's been shortchanged for a long time. And so for us to go forward and to really give students the full American experience up into the present and talking about present day issues. Why is it that Black people are more likely to live near hazardous waste facilities? Why is it that non-white districts receive $23 billion less than white districts despite serving the same amount of students? Why is it that when it comes to drug crimes, innocent Blacks are 12 times more likely to be convicted than innocent whites? These are things that students need to question and need to think about. And these are the things that, African American studies will pose, but not necessarily tell them, hey, it's this or it's that. That's for students to think critically about whether they're conservative or liberal or to the left.
So I really appreciate your focus on critical thinking, Dr. Nichols. My understanding of Florida's objection is that there wasn't enough critical thinking built into the specific course, that it only had one point of view on, for example, reparations, one point of view on affirmative action, which was to support them, when we know that these are things that the Black community itself is, engaged in a very healthy debate about. Affirmative action. I think only 51% of Black Americans support it. Just as one example of something that the course was presenting a single view on something that the Black community itself is healthily and happily debating. My question to you would be, is there any version of an African American Studies AP class that you would feel was not giving students the ability to think critically because it was too dogmatic, too dogmatically, let's say, Marxist or whatever the critique was? Can you imagine a version of this that you would say, oh, this is not doing what I think it should be doing? What would that look like?
So first of all, I think we need to remember that AP courses are elective. Like, not every student in Florida is going to take AP African American Studies. They have the opportunity, and if they or their parents object, that they can take European history and culture. They can take art history. There are other courses they can take. This is for students who choose to take African American Studies, AP African American Studies. So I think that's an important point that we need to understand, that this is not being forced on any student. Any curriculum in African American Studies, if it leans to the left or the right or whatever it is that people interpret, it is not something that's being forced on students. What's being done is the option is being taken away because they don't like certain elements and certain ideas and theories. And from what I understand, it is DeSantis who's saying he doesn't want these things taught. He doesn't like the feminism. He doesn't like the queer studies. And again, the thing that would be too dogmatic would be, again, telling students what to think rather than just presenting them with ideas and theories and concepts. I think we should absolutely teach about communism, about socialism, about the differences between the two, about capitalism, and not necessarily say, but capitalism is the winner. Allow for students to come up with their own ideas and to think critically about these ideas. But it's only when you fear that they may come to a different conclusion that you will take the option away from them. And I think, number one, it's disrespectful to our students and to our young people who have those abilities and those cognitive abilities to actually discern what they believe and what they don't believe. We've seen that, I think one of the things that I've seen with young people is they question everything. They are very much idealistic, but they are also some of the people that question. It's older people that get set in their ways and get very upset when new information comes in. So I think that we need to understand that young people have the ability and they will look at some of these ideas and they are not necessarily going to believe everything their teacher says. And I think the wrong way to go about it would be a teacher saying this is the right answer and this is the wrong answer when it comes to critical issues. Now, there are things in history that you can't deny. The statistics that I stated, which are going on right now, they're redlining cases. We can't talk about redlining in the past when the Department of Justice just a week ago announced that, there's a redlining case where they got $31 million from City National Bank in LA for racial redlining. We can't say redlining ended in 1968. That's the version that you would get in American history. But what you'll get in African American studies and history is a more holistic view. Yeah, we still have these issues. We still have these challenges. They're still institutionalized. And what conclusions are you going to come to about them?
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Jason, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we'll have more Rising right after this.